and it was a decent place up to a point. I then became a foreign correspondent. I traveled the world. I went from country to country, particularly Muslim countries. And you realize that America doesn't mean decency, it means prison cells. It doesn't mean democracy, it means torture. It doesn't mean freedom, it means illegal invasions. I got to know Pakistan very well, where the CIA orchestrated the dislodgement of the rather good civilian administration backed by the Brits, Iskander Mirza, the first president of Pakistan, and his replacements by a dictator. America has never funded civilian governments in Pakistan. It has paid huge sums of money to numerous dictatorships because it is the support of democracy doesn't get further than the Atlantic Ocean, and even then it's been bought by oligarchs. It's so distressing. Iran, we're hearing a lot about Iran. Everything that went wrong, MI6 and the CIA wiped out democratic government in Iran in 1953 so that America's chosen dictator could take over. And that led inexorably, eventually, to the mullahs. And I used to go one country after another. The genocides in Indonesia, the genocides in Guatemala, the atrocious war in Vietnam. America is a barbarous, savage nation, and it is very... Yes, sir? I can't hear you.
Come a bit closer.
I'm going deaf, I'm sorry.
As the honourable gentleman not forgetting that this country has also given several examples of good liberal interventionism?
Well, I'm not even the good ones. I'm trying to think of an example, possibly the Balkans. But I mean, if you look for the last, this brings me on to the recent liberal interventions, the horror, the disaster of the Iraq War, where we have a British Prime Minister committing the crime of crimes, the crime of aggression, set out in Nuremberg to illegally invade a country and completely mess it up.
Did the Kurds feel like that?
There's always an argument for an invasion, but what Britain and the United States, above all, did to Iraq and the consequences have been so severe and terrible that I think that that remark absolutely reflected the staggering ignorance of the United States, that they, yes, they don't understand. Sorry?
Did the Kurds stop getting gas?
No, they stopped getting gas, but you try that. But you tried to. It led to the emergence of ISIS. It led to massacres beyond massacres in Iraq. No, he's making point anyway. Yeah. And then we had the Afghanistan debacle. We had eventually been driven out of Kabul. A horrifying episode in late American. No, you've had your go, sir. No, I'm sorry. You're very noisy, but I did answer you and I engaged with you, and I'm moving on. We then had we then have Gaza. And this, we've been brought into this by the United States. The British policy, quite tragically, is never to offend the United States. It values our special relationship so much. Its key point here is not just your orange friend. It was Biden before. that we are engaged in what most good experts regard as a genocide. We are funding a genocide. We are supplying arms to a genocide. Now we are doing it in order to show support for the United States, but we can't detach ourselves from it. And so the idea, which did exist and did have a small element of reality, although it was always greatly exaggerated, that there was something marvelous about the American presence and the free world, has been shown to the rest of the world. In order to support Israel, we have defied the United Nations. We've trashed the ICJ. The British government is the best court in the world, the most important court in the world, the International Court of Justice. Its rulings, its provisional judgments haven't been supported by us. We have become a rogue state because we need to support. Yes, sir. Sorry, madam. Yeah.
Why has this got anything to do with
I'm
America?
sorry, can you come back? Yeah.
Why has this got anything to do with America being or not being the shining city?
Madam, I would remind you of the subject, I think what we're debating about, that America is still a shining city on the hill. Now, as I recollect, that phrase is based on the words of Jesus Christ on the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed be the meek, we're on the side of the powerless. We don't do wrong. That is what Jesus Christ taught. And that cannot define the terrible things we are doing, not just, by the way, in Gaza, but across the globe, because of our alliance with the United States of America, which has lost any connection with the original benign, you might say benign, origins of the nation. But let me just now turn to how much longer have I got, sir? 2 more minutes. I mean, let's look at these Pilgrim Fathers. They were sectarian bigots. They didn't like the Elizabethan settlements. They were against people having fun. They disapproved of humor. And actually, I think we were lucky to get rid of them. That America was founded on 2 great crimes: genocide and slavery. And if you look at the history of the 19th century, it is a story. America wasn't a nuisance to the rest of the world because it just settled it settled the United States. It drove out the native communities. It destroyed them. It broke treaties. It massacred them. That was why the rest of the globe was able to manage without America, because they were dedicated to the destruction of the native peoples. Once they'd done that, we had their they noticed that the Spanish Empire was at its final stages in the Philippines, and so they used their techniques learned in the Indian Wars to go and genocide the Moros. That there was a brief moment when very belatedly they came to our rescue in the fight against tyranny in World War II. But generally speaking, I cannot argue that it's ever been a shining city on a hill. And nowadays, to everybody, Karen Pierce will know this better than anybody else, to the vast majority in countries in the world, America means barbarism, tyranny, torture, prison cells, and mass murder. And I'm sorry.
If it means that, sir.
They want to go to America to escape the consequences of American
be away from the
imperialism in their own countries. I'm afraid. Thank you. Is that it? Yeah.
I now call upon Dame Karen Pearce to speak in favour of the motion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Secretary. This is my favourite topic, so thank you for giving me the opportunity. And what a wonderful place to be having a disputation. The Secretary told me this evening about it is the Lady Chapel is the site of the Virgin Mary's first known visit to the United Kingdom. Unfortunately, the Foreign Office files on the Virgin Mary's state visit have been weeded. But I think it just underscores what a fantastic place and how lucky we are to be here. And Mr. Speaker, if I can begin by a tribute to you, sir. Abraham Lincoln, you may know his story. Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin. He travelled on a horse to the district courts of the Midwest of the United States. And he carried a book in his bag, and it was Blackstone. And for those of you who are not lawyers, Blackstone is, if I may say, the Bible of common law on which America, like the United Kingdom, is founded. And the one great thing about common law is that it believes in freedom. It supports freedom. It believes in things being permissive and not precautionary. And that, if I may submit, ladies and gentlemen, is the great founding principle of both the United Kingdom and the United States of America. We heard from my colleague, the first proponent, how the phrase Shining City came about and how it was used to enormous effect by Ronald Reagan and also, incidentally, by JFK. And for Ronald Reagan, it was one of the great speeches written by the amazing Peggy Noonan, who began as a Democrat but then changed to be a Republican. And when I was in Washington, I had the enormous pleasure of getting to know Peggy. And I asked her about the phrase. And she made a really important point that I would like to stress to you tonight. Peggy pointed out that the essential point about the phrase is that it is not, and it never has been, intended to describe the America of today, whether that is your America of LBJ, who did brilliant things on civil rights and not so brilliant things in other areas, whether it was the America of McCarthyism, the America of Watergate, the America of Iran-Contra. We all know about those, and we have our own versions of them, as do the Japanese, as do the Chinese, as do the Soviet Union, which President Reagan helped to dissolve by his policies. I don't think anyone in this wonderful church thinks that the world today would be better if the Soviet Union had stayed with us. It is a vision. If you do think the world would be better if the Soviet Union had stayed with us, I would be very happy to continue that particular debate outside afterwards. The phrase, yes?
Do you not think that under Vladimir Putin, the Soviet Union and the Soviet ideology is still with us?
Oh no, I love this question. Thank you so much, because it enables me to trot out a line I used in Washington. President Putin is a Russian imperialist. Do not forget that. He brought back the Orthodox Church. He's not a communist. What President Putin actually set out to do with his war in Ukraine is recreate the Russian Empire, and what he got was the Soviet-era economy. But back to the phrase, back to a shining city on a hill. It's a vision of what America can be, as indeed the Bible intended it to be a vision of what society could be. And I've referred to some of the problems with America. The Speaker for the opposition enumerated many of them. You could add the Civil War to that. But I want to take issue with his point about genocide and slavery. some of you will have seen the Prime Minister's press conference today with President Trump. I think the Prime Minister explained very clearly what our policy towards Gaza is, what the government's policy towards recognition of Palestine is, and what the government's policy towards what Israel, who is, we believe to be a friend of the United Kingdom, but how much and how often government and government ministers, hang on a minute, have condemned what Israel is doing in Gaza. And the Prime Minister set all that out. So we do not blindly follow the United States.
Respond to this. Why, if they condemn it, why do they sell the arms to Israel and provide the military advice and the intelligence advice and the military assistance to a country which they condemn for it, effectively, they wouldn't accept this word, a genocide? Why?
So I will ask the room, if I may, or you, sir, if anyone knows how many licenses the government has suspended to Israel on arms sales.
Just over 30.
And if
Out of
anyone knows,
320 licenses, they've suspended about 30, leaving 290. And above all, the F-35 fighters.
I'll happily talk about the F-35. It is not possible to distinguish F-35s that go to Israel, and it would mean the loss of a great many jobs in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, and it would mean our abrogating our responsibilities to NATO for the lack of certainty that those particular planes would be going to Israel. So there are equities here, and that is what international affairs and international policy is about. To quote Henry Kissinger, it is not a choice between perfect options. Governments in the US and the UK must do the best they can to protect the country and protect its citizens and support our allies and always strive to do good in the world.
Is doing the best that it can to end the horrible mistreatment of innocent civilians in Gaza? Do you think it is doing the best that it can?
Yes, I do. And if you'd listened to President Trump today, and if you'd been a fly on the wall in President Trump's meeting with the Prime Minister, you would have seen some evidence of that. But I'd like to move on, if I may, Mr. Secretary. Whatever the challenges of America today, and they are not unique to America, the challenges of Reagan's time, the challenges of the Massachusetts Bay colony of 1640, the vision of America and what it can be is still shining strong. And I would like to describe at this point George Washington. I don't know how many of you have been to the very small room in the Maryland courthouse in the state capitol building, where George Washington resigned his commission and went back to his farm, like Cincinnatus. That is what America has given the world. At the time, in the Northern Hemisphere alone, there were only 2 republics, and they were very small, in Switzerland and a couple of the smaller Italian states. But George Washington set up a republic, set up democracy, set up the Declaration of Independence, and that goal that America gave, going back to my point about freedom, that is still relevant to a shining city on a hill. And my honourable friend who spoke first set out some of the wonderful things that really underpin American society and the American people. And I think if anyone doubts that, just look at the agreement that was signed today for £250 billion worth of cooperation on technology, a common framework taking the defence relationship for the United Kingdom and the United States to its next level, assuring jobs, assuring Britain remains the 3rd most important country in the world for tech after the US and China.
This is just propaganda. Could you come to the
Is the point that you not just made, just blatant government propaganda? You're just pushing government messaging. It's nothing to do with the debate.
Well, it's to do with the debate in that it's explaining why we value our relationship with America and why I personally support the proposition. And as I'm a government servant, it's quite hard for me to talk about government policy without supporting it. The point I'm trying to make, sir, is that I could answer all Mr. Oborne's points. He will recall that the Brits were equally culpable in 1953 in Iran. In fact, if you ask an Iranian, they will believe we were more culpable. But it's easier and quicker, given we are limited in time, for me to refer to current day policy. But if you want to have a historical debate dealing with all of Mr. Oborne's points, then I'm very happy to do that afterwards. I will say that the outpouring from America on the death of the Queen was something amazing to behold. We had people queuing for 8 hours outside the embassy, leaving flowers and poems and signing the condolence book. We had the cathedral absolutely full of the Vice President and most of Congress for the memorial service. These are our friends and allies. Well, I'm trying to explain why I support the proposition, and I'm trying to give the audience some evidence of why you should support the proposition, because the things America does are directly relevant to this country, as Mr. Oborne says, but they are by no means the barbarous and tyrannical country that he tried to portray. And in fact, the Queen acknowledged that, to go back to my George Washington theme. When she gave a speech in Philadelphia, she spoke about the American Revolution and the War of Independence, and she said it had taught Britain a very valuable lesson, that we had tried to cling too long to something that could not be kept. And she used it to describe how America and Britain together had gone on to lay the foundations of freedom in the Western world and beyond, that had helped so many countries to thrive. I'm sorry, I've given away an awful lot. I would like to continue, if I may, if you'll allow me. It doesn't matter who is the President of America. It doesn't matter, for the purposes of the proposition, that America makes mistakes. All countries make mistakes. If you don't think the Soviet Union and China make mistakes, take another look. America is our best protection against autocracy. We cannot do it by ourselves alone. Open societies, open markets are the basis of free societies and help ordinary citizens to thrive. Mr. Oborne referred to Churchill and Roosevelt. That alliance is alive and well and celebrated its 75th anniversary in Washington last year. President Trump has recommitted to that, and you will have seen its effect when the Russian drones went over Poland. So again, without American leadership, without that shining city on the hill, which, please remember, ladies and gentlemen, is an aspiration. It is not a description. It is an aspiration. And my friend who spoke first well laid out why America is a can-do, aspirational society. I do want to leave you with one last point, if I may, which all moves in the same direction of this wonderful, challenging, but fundamentally most important of the United Kingdom's allies. Benjamin Franklin, of whom I'm sure we'll hear more later. In my view, Benjamin Franklin had one big flaw. He thought the national bird of the United States should be the wild turkey. I think the United States and we and the NATO alliance and the cause of freedom are greatly helped by the fact that it's the bald eagle that soars over the shining city. Thank you.
I now call upon Anne Pettifor to speak in opposition of the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair, and may I thank Father Marcus for the privilege of being part of this wonderful debate and with this wonderful community here. And can I also echo what Peter said about the ambassador to Washington, Dame Pierce. I think she did a marvelous job, and I admire her for everything she did and said, and her loyalty to the Labour government, to the current government. I want to begin by saying that I think that the United States is not a city a shining city on the hill. It is actually a tawdry state, and in my view, in a process of failure and a process of collapse. And I deeply mourn that fact, because like many in this room, I grew up thinking the United States was a model for us all to follow. I want to begin by saying that I grew up in South Africa, and I remember as a child watching Sputnik fly across over my parents taking me out into the garden to look at Sputnik, and instilling me with great fear as the threat posed by Russia. We regarded Russia as a powerful empire, and it was an empire. It had imperial interests in Africa, very near to where I grew up. And so it was with absolute astonishment that we witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989. Nobody thought that it was possible. Nobody thought it would happen. Much had been done to attack the Soviet Union and to prevent that, but it just collapsed, and within actually a very short period of time. And I believe the United States is heading in that direction. And that is because the Trump administration and and there are many reasons for it, but at the moment, one of the reasons is to do with the Trump administration. The speech, The Shining City on the Hill, is what appears in Ronald Reagan's final speech as President of the United States. And in that speech, he tells a story. He tells a story about the carrier Midway, which was patrolling the South China Sea. And the sailor, like most American servicemen, were young, smart, and fiercely observant. The crew spied on the horizon a leaky little boat, and crammed inside were refugees from Indochina hoping to go to America. The Midway sent a small launch to bring them to the ship and safety. As the refugees made their way through the choppy seas, one spied the sailor on the deck, stood up and yelled out at him, "Hello, American sailor. Hello, freedom man." Today, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, smirks and jokes about shooting fishermen in international waters. That's what's happened to the United States of America. The Trump administration, in collusion with corporate power, has undermined and corrupted the power of key institutions and pillars of a stable state. The once hallowed American Constitution, the judiciary, the rule of law, the democratic power of the Congress and Senate to hold executive power to account, the power of universities and other learned institutions to research and innovate independently around issues like health and climate breakdown. And increasingly, the current administration is undermining the power of the media. It might be Jimmy Kimmel today, but tomorrow is the New York Times and perhaps even Disney. Yes.
Is it your opinion that the current threats to speech in the media in the United States are starker than they were at the time of McCarthy when the Sputnik flew over your house in South Africa?
Yes, I think they are, and I have to agree with you about that. Now, the point about collapse is that it can be abrupt and unforeseen. It took under a century for Rome to go from rule by a single emperor in a fractured to a fractured chessboard of competing kingdoms, as Luke Kemp argues in his book Goliath's Curse. But it took only a few days last week for the corrupt state of Nepal to be burnt down and destroyed by the righteous anger and destructive power of its youth. And the killing of Charlie Kirk last week reminds us that the power of the American state exercises through threats and violence may well be met by counter-threats and violence deployed by its well-armed and weaponized citizenry. But as far as I am concerned, the main reason for the dark clouds that surround the hill that the United States stands on is its role in helping to build a world without rules. As the Financial Times editorial argued this week, the abandonment of the current administration's international rules-based order by the current administration has led to a new order, one based on transactions and unilateral force, which produces a kind of anarchy and a proliferation of violence. Yes?
It's this current administration that has taken in refugees from your native South Africa because of the collapse there.
Oh.
So they are doing a sterling work at keeping up order in these places.
You've touched a very, very sore point there. I grew up in South Africa under an authoritarian racist regime, and the current regime in South Africa is not oppressing the people that I come from, the Afrikaners. So please, that's a ridiculous point. So it's not only the international community that is without a rules-based order. American economists and their followers, namely the Chicago boys, used Chile and the downfall of President Allende as the site of an experiment in economics that was to lead to an international economic system whose singular motive was a world without rules. In other words, the deregulation and detachment of global capitalism from democratic oversight and the unleashing of free market financial anarchy worldwide.
You say a world without rules, but if there wasn't freedom of navigation in the Gulf, through which 70%, you mentioned a world without rules, but if there wasn't freedom of navigation in the Gulf, through which 70% of the world's trade flows, and if there wasn't freedom of navigation in the South China Seas, we would all be much worse off. And those sea lanes are kept open because of the United States of America and because of American military might. And we all, the world system, the world rules, benefit from that.
That's a fair point, but it's obviously because of American vested interests that we have those, and it's imperial outreach that is we have that sort of monitoring of the South China Sea and so on. So I want to go back to my point about detachment of the economic system from democratic oversight. Global capitalism is now in the process of actually helping undermine one of the most important and powerful tools that the United States has to deploy influence around the world, and that is the United States dollar. And how is it doing that? Astonishingly, it's doing that by the administration's attack on the Federal Reserve, which has already led to a decrease in the value of the dollar over this last few months, but in my view will ultimately harm the role of the dollar in the global economy. But then there's something else. There's the tolerance for something called crypto. Yes, at the back.
The most exciting times in democracy have been when we have reduced poverty for people.
Reduced what?
Reduced poverty for people. We
Right.
have not detached democracy from people or the economy from people. People have enjoyed the benefits of neoliberalism.
Well,
do you agree?
No, I do not agree. So neoliberalism has led to a state of international, if you like, anarchy, financial anarchy, and that has encouraged levels of fraud and corruption that are unprecedented in history. It has empowered drug dealers and warlords across the world because of the deregulation of the movement of capital and so forth. But I want to come back to my point about the dollar and crypto. Crypto is a criminal currency promoted by libertarians of a pioneering frontier spirit whose global valuation has rocketed to $4 trillion. And even as it is clothed in the respectability of the US congressional and presidential approval, it is actually beginning to undermine the use of the dollar. And that is not just my view, but the view of, for example, Professor Ken Rogoff. And one of the leaders of one of the people looting the Bitcoin system is none other than the President of the United States. Trump Media and Technology Group Corporation, the firm behind Truth Social, has acquired about $2 billion in Bitcoin and related securities as part of the previously announced plan to become a crypto treasury company. The point of the matter is that crypto is not money, and it's not even a currency. It's a commodity that has no value whatsoever, but is used for purely speculative and criminal purposes. And the President of the United States is promoting this currency. And that is what is going to undermine the value of the dollar, and with the undermining the value of the dollar, undermine the value of the American economy. It is an incredibly dangerous strategy, and it's a reckless and criminal strategy, in my view.
Is it really the case that debating a particular aspect of American present economic policy is relevant to this motion? Because I would argue that it is not. The shining city on a hill was from the 17th century, and should we not be re-engaging with what that meant for freedom then, and whether that is either valid now or not, rather than getting into these runes of capitalism versus Marxist economics?
That's not where I've been going. So I'm merely trying to make the point, which I know is difficult for you to face, which is that the United States is weakened, is being weakened, very deliberately weakened by this president. It is a tawdry state that is, in my view, in the progress of failure. And if you can't face that, if you find that difficult to accept, that's not my problem, that's your problem. The United States is so weak that it has outsourced its foreign policy making to Mossad. We now have a situation of Israel first, not America first. And those are not my words, those are the words of Tucker Carlson. I've made my point, Chair, and I would like to stop there, but I would like to say that I think it's a frightening prospect that the United States is in a state of failure, and that it's a frightening prospect that we are not facing up to that reality. Thank you very much.
We have heard 4 very powerful speeches. Whether the ships have been sailing in quite the same direction is going to be a matter for you, but it is now your opportunity to speak in favour or in opposition to the motion before the final 2 guest speakers close the debate. I would like it to be balanced, so if somebody who wishes to speak in favour of the motion would indicate. Then we'll do it in turn.
The motion is that America is still a shining city on a hill, not whether it has always been, in all its forms, in all its ways. This is a nation that has in its constitution, or the Declaration of Independence, I can't remember, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We should honour that. That is to be cherished. Is that in China's constitution? Is that Russia's constitution? We're blessed in this country without a constitution. But even so, the Americans should be cherished for that heroism. Also, America's a nation in turmoil. America isn't going, we're fine. They're not complacent. They're anxious. They're desperate. They're permanently trying to improve their perfect union. Are the Chinese youth of today talking about their constitution, struggling with their future, raging against their president? Are the young people of Russia doing the same? Do we hand over freedom to people that won't discuss anything? Honestly, it's absurd. America is deeply flawed, but I'd hand over my freedom to them any day of the week.
Real passion. Somebody in opposition?
Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to bring it very much down from the massive overarching politics that everyone's been talking about to the baseline of the American people, who I think we can all agree are kind of the base of what is the American dream and the American ideal. So I'm just going to talk a couple of figures at you briefly, but let's just take the Gini coefficient, which is an excellent, not perfect, but an excellent model of inequality based on gender, GDP per capita, and a few other things. Let's just put it this way. The US Gini coefficient, which measures the combined inequality of several different factors, was higher in 1993 than it was in both 2010 and 2021. Going down in the equality then. I'm not doing a speech, so sorry. Let's talk about the baseline of American health, which we all love to talk about as we have the lovely NHS. But let's talk about the 1,400 cases of measles that as of August this year were occurring in the United States when the disease was declared eradicated in 2001. Do you think those children dying of measles, largely because of the massive anti-vax movement that has been massively agreed with by many politicians of many different American politics, do you think that they would agree that America is still a shining city on a hill for them? I don't think so. Let's go even further into that. The average cost of an American stay in hospital for one day, I don't think anyone knows exactly what it is. It is over $3,000 for a single day in hospital. A single day. Just recently, Donald Trump allowed a bill, or encouraged a bill, I don't exactly know what the words are, but encouraged a bill that calls for the imprisonment of someone who burns the American flag. This is in direct violation of the First Amendment, which our dear friend Mr. Franklin co-signed. I would also like to say that a lot of the people tonight have talked about the aspirations of America, where it will be in the future, where it's been trying to get, and the people who want to get it there. But aspirations are shaped by lagging narratives, not the actual realities of a country that people live in. And I think Reagan applauded the new patriotism in his speech about a shining city on the hill, but he said it wouldn't count for much unless it was grounded in thoughtfulness and knowledge. And I don't see much of either of those in the US today. This page...
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to our speakers. I would like to thank the previous speaker for bringing up the concept of the American dream and American inequality. I stand before you a product of the American dream. My parents were divorced very young. I never knew my biological father. My mom cleans houses. My dad spent most of my childhood in prison, where he remains to this day. I took out student loans to fund my education myself, my undergraduate, where I studied economics and learned a great deal about the Gini coefficient and the inequality that faces my nation and so many others. But I stand here a beneficiary of that inequality. I grew up on food stamps, was homeless for several periods, sleeping in my car in the Walmart parking lot, going around. And now I have the benefit of having attended, paid for with loans I got from my government, one of the top schools in the world to study law, and I now work for one of the most powerful law firms in the world, and I get to live here. I came from the bottom level to the very top, and that is a product of my nation, of which I am proud to be a member. And whenever I've told this story in bars, to people that I've met in pubs here, there's a word that I go back to that I was told by a member of, based on his accent, a very high British class, and he described my life story as far-fetched. But in America, it is anything but. And to me, my nation, even though I chose to leave it and come here, even though I've faced health hardships and troubles, America is still a place where if you work hard enough, you can get to the very top. Whether you're a foreigner like Elon Musk or born of low birth and come home from the hospital to sleep in a sock drawer like I did, America is still that shining city on the hill for so many millions of us that call it our home.
How powerful is that? One in opposition? We'll do two more, so you'll get a chance.
Right, so I'll just give you some facts, because a lot of this has been very political and nuanced and nonsense. So America thinks it's first in everything, which is clearly not true. It's 46th in life expectancy. Press freedom, it's 42nd. Healthcare, 30th. Education, 26th. Happiness, 23rd. Freedom, although I don't know how they measure that, 17th. What America is first in: military spending, number of billionaires, incarceration, bankruptcy filings, medical debt, and gun deaths. So, wait. The question I have for the proposition is, what drugs are you smoking and can I have some?
Somebody who wishes to propose the motion? One more we can have. Oh, come on. Yes, thank you very much.
I want to ground you in the motion. This House believes that America, it says American here, but America is still a shining city on a hill. This is not a debate about economics or base politics. It is a philosophical proposition, and it is a philosophical aspiration, and we should address it in philosophical and spiritual ways, granted that we are in a church. What is a shining city on a hill? Well, this takes us back to the Jerusalem, the New Jerusalem, not the one that Netanyahu's wanting to build in Gaza, but the one in the Bible. It is about trying to do what's right and lifting everybody up. It is giving people a vision. And does America still give people a vision around the world? Well, the answer to that, to those naysayers, is that even a shining city might eventually face storm clouds that mask its ability. But the reality is that the American dream is what motivates Americans. It might cause some of the divergence and some of the inequalities. But remember this: equality is not about equality of outcome. It is about equality of opportunity and giving everyone the opportunity to better themselves. And that is possible in America. It used to be more possible here than it is today. And I would say that it is Britain that has lost its position as a shining city on a hill, not America. So remember this: where else in the world can a lowly born person aspire to reach the pinnacle? And it is not necessary that you actually achieve it, but that you have the ability to aspire, and that your aspiration is not viewed as unacceptable, whether you achieve it or not. And therefore, I say, The motion should be supported. Thank you.
One more in opposition. One more in opposition.
First, I'd like to thank all of the people that have spoken in this fantastic institution, and to acknowledge the breadth and depth and the value of both these arguments, of both the opposition and the support for the proposition. I don't think that we should look at America and say that all things are good or all things are bad. I think we're on a journey. I think they're on a journey. When we think of a shining light, we have to ask ourselves, shining light for whom? Whose hill? And who is benefiting from that? And I think we have stories where individually, there are individuals have prospered. My accent, I'm originally Canadian, but I've made Britain my home by choice. Look at some of the stories of other countries outside of Britain, including Canada, and a very close ally to America, Canadians, and some of the turning against, the challenging economically. And I think we can't separate the religion, the politics, and the economics of the situation, because it is an emotional debate. And we find that I actually love many things about America, but I question, if we look at the proposition, is it still the shining light? Is it still adhering to that value, that system that it had? And the evidence that we're looking at now is when you have a shortage of wealth and a shortage of things, what happens is people seek to compete. And I'm starting to see, and this isn't unique to America, this is a global phenomenon, we're starting to compete for resources. We've gone through some very good times, and I think those times are challenging now. Can America continue to be the shining light? Can it pull itself together? There's divisiveness I'm seeing in the politics. People are moving to I have cousins and family that are American, and they won't talk to each other because some are Republicans, they literally will not talk to them. That is not a way of joining and benefiting from the shining light. We've talked about some of the international institutions that have been built. If we're not engaging in multilateral discussions and we're becoming very self-centered individual, I'm concerned. So I argue against the motion that it is still the shining light. I think it still has the possibility to be, but there has to be some changes. I'm concerned. I'm concerned for this country, but we're talking about America. I'm concerned, and I'm hoping with some challenge and some new thinking, and I don't totally agree with some of what's happening with the Trump administration, but I think you have to challenge ideas to come up with something new, and we're on that journey. So I look forward to what that will become, but right now I don't support the proposition.
I am extremely grateful for the passionate and helpful contributions that have been made from the House. I now call upon Lord Hannan of Kingsclere to respond finally in support of the motion.
In this, his tercentenary year in this place, I fancy we feel the ghost of Benjamin Franklin stirring. Listen, and you may hear the creak as he turns the heavy wooden screw of the printing device, the chink as he puts the backward typeface in, the whisper as the still wet paper is laid out. He was invoked by Father Marcus, and I'm going to disturb his shade further, because Benjamin Franklin, who spent almost as much time here as in Pennsylvania, spent most of his life thinking of himself as a Brit. And when he joined the revolution, did so in the spirit of a man who believed that he was fighting for the rights he had always assumed to be his birthright as an Englishman. It made him a very late and reluctant convert to the cause. As late as 1773, he was writing to the Patriot leaders as follows: "Remember withal that this Protestant country, our mother, is worth saving, and that her weight in the scales of Europe may depend upon our union with her. This, in other words, was not a frothing enthusiast. He went in the end, to the patriot cause, as the prayer book says, of matrimony reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, as a scientist should, in a spirit of empiricism, caution, and reason. And it is in that spirit that I want us to address the motion before us tonight. No one is claiming that the United States is perfect. Perfection, my friends, is not for this life. The world is gross and sublunary. And I think that was understood when the image of the city on the hill was first proposed. A city on a hill is seen from a distance. We don't get close up and observe the cracked paving stones or the people tipping their chamber pots from the window. Or, to update the metaphor, we don't see the traffic fumes and hear the noise. Rather, we detect the hum of the enterprise of an impatient people. A people whose bold and spirited restlessness has given them not only drive-through Dunkin' Donuts, but drive-through weddings. A spirit that took their flag to the moon and will take it to Mars. We see the skyscrapers of a people who couldn't wait to shake the dust of Europe from their feet in order to build something better. And I want us to debate this motion with a sense of due perspective. To judge the United States as we would any other country, rather than holding it to an impossible standard. Now, my friend Peter Oborne, who I much admire, said in quite strong language, it's a nation of torture chambers and tyranny. And then he spoke about all the places where it was seen that way, all these wonderful places which are, of course, paragons of liberal democracy. He mentioned Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Iraq. Now, again, apply a little sense of perspective. Do you see the people of Pittsburgh queuing up to get into Pakistan, saying we are escaping the torture chambers and the tyrannical government? Like Peter, I count myself a friend of the imprisoned former leader of Pakistan, Imran Khan. I was organizing meetings for him while he was incarcerated. I don't think that Kamala Harris needs to worry about being held in solitary confinement for having lost an election. Keep a sense of perspective about which country people are wanting to move to. And may I say, about the best measure of whether a country, where a country ranks, never mind the popular internet meme that we just had read out in the floor debate. The most basic measure is the in queue longer than the out queue? Yes, it is true the United States has a problem with immigration. That's a good problem to have, right? I'll show you a country which has an immigration problem, and I'm showing you a country that you really don't want to live in. Although, that said, Mr. Chairman, we in this country seem simultaneously to have an immigration and an immigration crisis. We've somehow managed to arrange our affairs so that we're getting rid of all our millionaires and replacing them with family dependents who go straight onto welfare. So, but nonetheless, I ask you to show a little bit of fair-mindedness. A nation that turns a dream of freedom into a functioning nation-state, that attracts tens of millions of people from every continent and every archipelago, may not be perfect, but surely they are drawn by that vision. And that vision acts as a corrective. Yes, of course, the United States has its sins and errors, as every country does. It can behave selfishly and sordidly, as every country can. More usually, I have to say, its errors are those of exuberance. Right? I was, like Peter, I was one of the handful of conservatives in this country who opposed the Iraq War at the time. But that was, as so often, an error of overconfidence, rather than an act of meanness. And I think that is, if you like, still driven. It's the flip side of the impatience and the boldness and the spiritedness. And that vision, that founding vision contained in the foundational documents, inspires people to do better. When Martin Luther King was arguing against one of the more obvious failures of the American Republic, he didn't do so by rooting his language in generalities or even in biblical truths, but by constantly referring back to the founding documents to which he referred as a promissory note. His argument all the way through was this republic is failing to live up to its ideals. He kept on peppering his speeches with references to all men being created equal. You could not make that argument in Russia or in China or even in Iraq or Iran or Pakistan. So to say that a country is falling short of its ideals is simply to admit that it has those ideals and that those ideals are worth aspiring to. Yes, of course.
It's very kind of you. I think you're misrepresenting me a little bit on Iran and Pakistan. And the point I was making was that US military or military intervention ended the civilian administration in Pakistan and replaced it by a military dictatorship. Likewise, in Iran, you had a nascent liberal democracy, and the CIA, backed by MI6, smashed it. That is the point I was making. And
as I say, errors of exuberance. But you know, given that we saved the world first from the Nazi tyranny and then from the communist tyranny, I will take the package and live in a free country where we can have debates like this, because imagine that the Second World War or the Cold War had ended differently. We would not be having these arguments about whether the coup in Iran was really our fault. And I just want to go back to this point of, if there is a measure by which you can be corrected, if you are falling short of your own ideals, then let's apply that to the present day. Right? This is, by the way, a very old debate, just like everyone else, inspired by the beauty of our place. I'm sure a lot of you will recall the scene in The Brothers Karamazov, where there's the argument about how can a just God permit all these horrors? How can an all-powerful and beneficent deity permit the suffering of a child? And the answer that's given in that scene in the Optina monastery is, well, but how can you say that these are terrible things, other than by reference to some absolute morality? How can you say that the suffering child is a bad thing, or that these other things are evil, without assuming some kind of moral code? By the way, the debate in the Optina monastery in the book was answered in the most grisly way in real life, because that was the headquarters of the Soviet secret police when they made the decision to massacre the thousands of Polish army officers, priests, and intellectuals who'd been captured in 1940. The decision to kill people in the Katyn massacre was made in that Optina monastery. That's what happens when you edit out all morality and judge human life purely in utilitarian terms. But let's allow the current administration the same courtesy of being judged with perspective, compared to other places, against that high standard set in the old courthouse in Philadelphia. As James says, I'm not a fan of the steel-manned orange man. I think his character flaws make him unfit for office. I think his attitude to democracy debases the republic. And yet, the guardrails have held. Unlike the Putins of this world, or the Xis, or even the Erdogans, he can't just carry on, much as he would like to, and award himself a third term. He can't strike down every law that he finds inconvenient, as he found just now on the tariff laws. Yes, this will be my last.
He can, because he has a majority on the Supreme Court, and that is what the Supreme Court has been obliging him at every level, at every challenge there is to the
forgive me, but the most recent test of this was his, I think, preposterous claim that the tariffs that he was imposing were a national emergency, and the court, Republican appointed, said, no, it's plainly not. In other words, the system still works, not because it's perfect, but because it is better than most of the alternatives, and we should be grown up to realize that in an imperfect world, we sometimes have to choose the lesser evil. Let me finish, because I'm getting signs on timing. Let me finish with why I think this is. What was decided in that little secular miracle that happened in Philadelphia? What was decided was to create a system of government where power was dispersed, devolved, and democratized, where the people in charge were constantly looking over their shoulder at their electorates, and where decisions were taken as closely as possible to the people that they affect. And that, my friends, has elevated and ennobled the human species. So I want to finish where Peter left us, actually, in August 1941, on the decks of HMS Prince of Wales when the Atlantic Charter was signed. It was the day that Franklin Roosevelt made the longest walk of his presidency. In a way that would nowadays be unimaginable, the media of that time had conspired to hide the fact of the president's polio from the public. Every photograph showed him seated or standing unaided. But that day, on his way to see Winston Churchill, he was determined to walk. And so, with his son on one side and a naval officer on the other, he made his slow way across the deck as the band struck up the Stars and Stripes Forever. And what followed was the greatest possible visual realization of what binds the English-speaking peoples together. It happened to be a Sunday morning. And so the crews of the two vessels, USS Augusta and HMS Prince of Wales, were mustered for a joint religious service. Churchill had chosen every detail personally and meticulously, down to the hymns, down to the reading that the chaplain gave from the pulpit on the deck. It came from the book of Joshua. As I was with Moses, so shall I be with thee. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee. Be strong and of good courage. And afterwards, exultantly, Churchill burst out the same language, the same hymns, the same ideals. And I want you to think, my friends, of what those ideals were. We mean by those same ideals not just generally that we're the good guys. We mean free speech and uncensored newspapers. We mean regular elections and representative government. We mean equality between men and women and equality before the law. We mean habeas corpus and jury trials. We mean all the things that make modern life rational and comfortable and pleasant. And although we now call them universal values, do you know what? We are being polite. These are overwhelmingly values that were determined and then exported in the language in which you are now listening to my words. If we had lost either the Second World War or the Cold War, there would be nothing universal about them then. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, we in this country, we of all people, should say with voice and with heart, God bless America.
Lord Hannan required a few extra seconds there. I now call upon Pete Hitchens to respond finally in opposition to the motion.
Good evening. As this is the house of God, I will begin with prayer, which you may all join in with or not, as the case may be, and it's very simple. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer, through Jesus Christ our Lord. I was in danger of being intoxicated by the exuberance of Lord Hannan's verbosity, but I hope I've now brought a certain sepulchral calm to the room. I wanted to address this slightly more seriously. He would be amused, I hope, to read the chapter on the Atlantic Charter meeting in my excellent book, unavailable at all leading booksellers, The Phony Victory, which describes the almost total uselessness to Britain of that meeting and the way in which Roosevelt treated Churchill with contempt and ignored all his requests, which I think should be more widely known. But that's for another moment in what I have to say here. The issue of whether America is a shining city on a hill is separate from so many other issues. As it was pointed out at the beginning, I have written and on many occasions said very many complimentary things about the United States, where I lived with joy and delight for 2 extraordinary years of my life and found it a place of both great beauty and inspiration, and somewhere from which I've learned a great deal. The first time I ever visited the United States in 1977, when I came home, I could not sleep for 3 weeks because I'd been so completely astonished by the difference between what I had been told and what I had been found. I say this because I really do not want anybody to think that I'm motivated by anti-Americanism, a phrase often used by people who criticize the United States. My point this evening is very simple. The United States is just another country. It's not Britain. It's not our special friend. It doesn't have any particular regard for us, nor is it elevated to the state of some extraordinary religious purity which enables it to stand above everybody else and to tell everybody else what to do. I jolly well hope that all American cities are on hills at the moment, because what else will enable the wind to blow away the very strong smell of marijuana? Returning to the distant history, it has been mentioned about the original statement that America should be a city on the hill, and Pastor Winthrop actually speaking to his congregation in Southampton, that unromantic place. Before I speak as a person associated with Portsmouth, in Southampton, that unromantic place, warning them that their conduct in this new colony and in this new world would be very sternly judged by those who didn't agree with them. That was the purpose of his speech, which was thereafter forgotten by almost everybody for about 200 years, until the United States had begun to do a number of things. The first thing that it had done is that it had come into existence. It didn't come into existence because of good old Ben Franklin plotting away revolutionarily here. It came into existence because the French autocracy decided to bankrupt itself in a revenge against Britain for its victory in the 7 Years' War, and to bankrupt itself in financing this bunch of not particularly savory rebels based in the top right-hand corner of what is now the United States. And that's what they did. There used to be a joke around the time of the Iraq War that you were supposed to Google French military victories, and the word would come back that there weren't any. The most significant French military victory in the history of the world, it was at Yorktown in 1781, achieved by Rochambeau and the Comte de Grasse, who defeated the British with a small amount of assistance from some Americans. When Cornwallis surrendered, he tried to surrender to the French. And they shrugged in that French way of theirs and said, sorry, not us, you have to surrender to these guys over here. And Cornwallis said, well, they didn't beat us, it doesn't matter, you have to surrender to them. And that is the beginning of this great myth of the city on the hill and the Great Republic. America was also a very revolutionary country. The reason why Canada exists, the reason why thousands of people trooped further north into the colder and bleaker parts of the continent, was because anyone who showed any loyalty to Anglican Christianity or to King George was tarred and feathered, shouted down, persecuted, driven from their homes by rough music. There was serious persecution of conservative persons in the new revolutionary United States. It wasn't a pretty sight, which is probably why Samuel Johnson, one of our greatest thinkers and writers, wrote a pamphlet in 1775 called, interestingly enough, Taxation, No Tyranny, which wouldn't go down very well now. And he jeered, memorably, in a phrase which has gone down through the centuries, how is it, and forgive the language here, but it is his, how is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes? Because what America immediately became was a country of slavery. And if you doubt any of this, one of the greatest speeches ever made in the history of the world was made by Abraham Lincoln, the second inaugural address. And I'm going to quote from it here because it states something very important about the lack of biblical understanding and the lack of city on the hillness among Americans at that stage in their history. He said of the two sides of the American Civil War, both read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any man should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces. But let us judge not that we be not judged. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. One could go on, and I don't know how much time I have left. I think I have. Wonderful. One could go on about American exceptionalism and the idea that in some way America had a particular mission in the world, which happened to come into the minds of Americans round about the time that they were stealing a large chunk of Mexico from the Mexicans, and also engaged in a major boundary dispute about Oregon with this country. Sorry, did you want to say something? this is also true. All kinds of people have done all kinds of things in Mexico, often the Germans, but it's not really the point, is it? Let me continue just as I was trying to do. So here we have a country. We have a country, and it's a country which has not always been terrifically friendly to this one. So in 1918, after we'd gone bankrupt fighting a mad war against Germany on behalf of the Russians, Woodrow Wilson, the then President of the United States, had been backing what he called the Big Navy Act, of which he said, and this is very specific, let us build a navy bigger than Britain's and do what we please. He resolved to build incomparably the greatest navy in the world, aiming to make the US Navy equal to any two others in the world. And during his sea voyage to London in 1918, for a dinner at Buckingham Palace, which I shall refer to in a moment if there's time, Wilson told his aides that he would no longer accept Britain's total dominance at sea. If Britain did not come to terms over this, he said, America would build the biggest navy in the world, matching theirs and exceeding it, and if they would not limit it, there would come another and more terrible and bloody war, and England would be wiped off the face of the map. Shortly afterwards, speaking at Buckingham Palace, not Windsor Castle, the same Woodrow Wilson said, you must not speak of us who come over here as cousins, still less as brothers. We are neither. And I think we should remember all this. We should also remember my good friend Christopher Mayer, who was Her Majesty's ambassador to the United States, who was ordered, because of our pathetic state in the world, to, in the words of Jonathan Powell, and I won't quote them completely, to get as far up the colon of the United States and stay there, the White House. So basically the British Embassy in Washington became then, and as far as I can see has probably been since, a sort of human colonoscopy expedition, which has been dedicated to supporting almost every serious mistake, as Lord Hannan refers to them, made by the United States in recent years. He's so kind. The Iraq War was an era of overconfidence. Well, you know, I think, Lord Hannan, that's probably almost exactly what Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin could be accused of committing in Ukraine. And then you had also another era of exuberance. But these things, nonetheless, eras as they were, exuberant as they may have been, led and continue to lead to the smashing of people's homes, to the killing of husbands, fathers, and brothers and sons in very large numbers, and to the spreading of conflict about the world. The United States has many virtues. I am prepared to sing them at almost any time. But it is absurd to treat it as some kind of ideal state. In fact, the whole enterprise of creating ideal states upon the planet, the whole idea that we can have New Jerusalems and heavens on earth, has been the source of almost all the worst evils that have ever taken place, whether in China, whether in the Soviet Union, or whether now in the countries laid waste by foolish and unnecessary American policies, very often driven by foolish idealism rather than by a sensible desire to protect people in their homes and ensure that we all live safely under our own vine and under our own fig tree, where we should. Thank you.
My professional background would have allowed you all to retire and consider your verdicts at great length, possibly spending hours or days or weeks deliberating this difficult question. However, I put all that to one side. The question is that this House believes that America is still a shining city on the hill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, a vote by hands. As many as are of that opinion, I'm not listening to volume, as many are of that opinion, please show their hands. This is those who are in support of the motion, in case you didn't catch it. Of the contrary, show hands. No abstentions this time. I think you've done it now. You're all right. So we've now got to do some maths. Math. Yes, you're quite right. I'm not indicating any bias one way or the other. Although I bitterly regret the death of the late Tom Lehrer.
The nose to the left, 146.
The eyes to the right, 96. The nose to the left, 146. The nose have it. The nose have it. Unlock. Could I, on behalf of everyone, thank the speakers, both the speakers in the main and those who've spoken from the floor, for their contributions to a most entertaining and interesting debate. Thank you very much.
And may I just echo the thanks of Sir Brian Leveson to the speakers, the guest speakers and those who spoke at the floor, and also to Sir Brian for his chairing of this debate. And may I invite you to continue to enjoy the evening as the bar will be open.